Greetings once again, my friends, and live from Retro Central. My name is Peter, and this is Consolation. As always, I thank you very much for taking the time to check out my work. I really do appreciate it. This week marks the beginning of the 2015 NFL season, and wow, not a moment too soon. After a very long preseason full of injuries, and then an off-season before that was filled with Deflategate and other assorted crap, we can now get to the games that count. We can get to fantasy football, we can get to talking about players and teams and playoff races and all that good stuff. Everyone starts out with a record of 0-0, so hope springs eternal for all 32 teams. What I like to do during the beginning of football season is I like to take a look at some football games and spotlight them on camera. And for this particular episode, I want to talk more about arcade sports games, arcade football games. Are you ready for some arcade football? I sure am, so let's dig in. Let's go back to 1985 first and a game called 10-Yard Fight, which was originally an arcade game and then ported to the NES in 1985. There are significant differences between the arcade cabinet and this game, as you might expect, being an NES game, especially early in the NES's lifespan. The arcade game had a timer that would inexorably tick down until you had to put more tokens in. That's how they grabbed you and had you continue to feed quarters into the machine. You could get more time by converting first downs or scoring touchdowns or field goals, but inevitably the time would run out and you'd have to put more money in. The NES cartridge, much like baseball, which is another black box game, takes the timers out of the equation, so you're just playing a full game regardless of how much time expires. This takes away a little bit of the intensity, as this game is not very difficult. The AI doesn't put up much of a fight, no pun intended, and there are also no extra bonus points, such as 1,000 points for a touchdown or 800 points for a first down. So there are no leaderboards after completing the game like there were in the arcade. Still, for $1 or $2, if you find it at a flea market or a swap meet, it's not a bad addition to your collection being a black box game, and it doesn't play badly either. So 10-Yard Fight from IREM for the NES. Another arcade conversion is John Elway's Quarterback, which is a conversion of Leland's Quarterback from the arcades. Now, Leland had nothing to do with this port. Rare, you know them, RC Pro-Am, Snake Rattle and Roll, Battletoads, Donkey Kong Country, I could go on and on. Rare was responsible for this port, and while they did an okay job, there aren't enough features here, and the game gets boring rather quickly. Once you play through a game and the game ends, that's pretty much it. Then you start playing a new game from scratch. There's no season mode here, there's no sense of progression, it's just one game and done. In addition, the AI opponent is very, very weak, and it's very easy to bury that opponent before halftime, especially if you pick the right plays. So it's unfortunate, doesn't look bad, doesn't sound terrible either, although the charge sound, you hear that way too often in the game, but other than that, just not a lot of substance to this game. If you find it for $1, maybe take a flyer on it if you're a John Elway fan. Other than that, you can let it slide. Interestingly, just jumping to the Super Nintendo for a moment, while Leland didn't have anything to do with that port, they did create their own football game called Troy Aikman Football for the Super Nintendo here and for the Sega Genesis in the next console generation. This game is more of an arcadey feel, but very Madden similar. So if you like Madden games, you might want to give this one a look. There is a battery backup in here, so you can save season progress. It doesn't look fantastic, but it doesn't look bad either. Certainly better than Capcom's MVP Football, which I'm not even going to talk about in this video. If you find this for a low price, why not? Take a flyer on it. I found this for $3 at Retro Games Plus in Newington, Connecticut. And I even got a chance to tear off the plastic wrap and open it for the first time on camera recently, and I'm glad I did. This is actually a pretty solid game. Back to the NES, and although this isn't an arcade-style football game per se, it's still fairly easy to pick up and play. This is NES play-action football. The cool thing about this is that it has the actual NFL players, not something that not all NES football games had. So if you're a fan of Walter Payton or any of the players of this particular era, you could find them in this game. The game is a little bit unusual, however. It takes place in a 3/4 isometric view, so it takes a little while to get used to the viewpoint. And there's also some player management that's involved in terms of monitoring how tired your players get, because if they have to be subbed out of the game for weaker players, it can totally turn the momentum of your team. So you got to be careful with how much energy you expend on hammering that energy button. Decent game, not the best, but certainly not the worst, and certainly worth a look for your collection if you're a sports game fan like I am. Now, while that game is worth a look, this one most certainly isn't. Jumping back to the Super Nintendo for a moment, this is the sequel, Super Play Action Football. This is ass. Please don't buy this game unless you're just looking for filler or looking to collect a complete SNES library. There is nothing good about this game. The graphics aren't that great, the sound isn't that great, the gameplay doesn't carry over very well from the NES, and it's not fun. I guess that's the most important thing. It's not fun to play. And any kind of sports game, especially an arcade-style sports game, needs to be fun. That's not what this is. I don't care that it has a battery backup. I don't care that it has an NFL license. This game should not have been made. Strong words. Strong words. Speaking of games that shouldn't be made, sticking with the Super Nintendo for just a moment, this is Konami's NFL Football. I'm going to tell you a little story about this game. EGM hyped this game up a lot when I was younger. Talked about all the Mode 7 usage in the game, and I'm like, oh, Mode 7, this is going to be great. Camera spinning around the field, going to be just like TV. It's not. The frame rate is terrible. There aren't any real players in the game. It's just the NFL license, which, you know, when you're paying $70 for a game at that point, you expect a little bit more. The camera is wonky. The plays in the playbook just aren't successful most of the time. There's random close-ups which make no sense. It's not good. I picked this up for $1 just after I picked up my Super Nintendo in 2012, just because I wanted to be reminded of what it's like to buy a bad game and the sour taste in my mouth. And I paid full price for this sucker. So shame on me, but shame on Konami too. This was not good. But let's talk about good football games now, shall we? Let's talk about Tecmo Bowl. No, not that Tecmo Bowl. That's coming in a moment. This is the original Tecmo Bowl, which is also based on an arcade game. This game, however, much different from the arcade original. No more two screens like there were in the arcade. This sticks to one screen. This has actual NFL players, much like NES Play Action Football does, but not the real teams. There's no stat tracking, and although there isn't a season mode per se, you can play against all of the teams in the game and track your progress using a password, which isn't that long. Fun game to play, very easy to pick up and understand. No penalties called, so you don't have to worry about making any rules infractions, which will interrupt your understanding of the game. And it's a fair challenge, whether you're playing against a computer or especially if you're playing against a human opponent. This game is less expensive than the other one, but still worthy of a spot in your library just to see how the other one came to be. So let's talk about the other one now. Yes, we're talking about Tecmo Super Bowl, the game that continues to get new releases to this day, even though they're unofficial. Tecmo Super Bowl is, in a word, awesome. Still. Even though the newer versions of the game may have different players, keeping the cutscenes, keeping the same arcade-style gameplay where you didn't have to worry about penalties, you just went out and played the game. You could play defense really well. They didn't have to be shootouts like 45-21 or anything like that. They could be low-scoring games if you knew what you were doing. And between the music and the graphics, the cutscenes, and the ease of play, this, if you don't have a version of this in your library, whether it's the NES version, the SNES version, or the Genesis version, you should grab it as soon as you can. Any of those games, or all of them, if you're a sports fan like myself, are more than deserving of a spot in your library, even though they are a bit pricey, and probably going to go up a bit considering that it's football season. This is one of the games that I'm happiest to have in my library, and I'm thrilled that I have it complete, even if the box is a little beat up. Sticking with arcades, let's talk about Super High Impact Football, the Super Nintendo and the Genesis version. Super High Impact Football is the granddaddy to this guy right here, which I'll talk about in a moment. Super High Impact Football takes place horizontally rather than vertically. But still, much like Blitz, you can choose your own play beforehand, and there are a plethora of plays to choose from. After the play is over, there's a lot of trash talking. The two teams can even come to blows at times where you have to hammer on the button to see who wins the fight. There's an over-the-top announcer, and if you play these games, you can easily see how it gave birth to Blitz not too long afterwards. This basically is to NFL Blitz what Arch Rivals was to NBA Jam, if you can understand that analogy. These games are not expensive. However, it's worth noting that there isn't any battery backup in either of these, so there's no stat tracking once you turn things off. And it's a one game at a time progression. There are no seasons or anything like that to kind of keep you playing. So you play a game, you have fun with that game, you turn it off, you throw it in your drawer, and you come back to it in a few weeks or a few months. So super high impact. A little bit more fun in the arcade, where I used to play it in an arcade that had a cover charge. So once you paid $5 to get into the arcade, games were either a nickel or a dime, or in super high impact's case, it was free. So I used to just play on that all afternoon. And then we come to my favorite arcade football series. We're talking about NFL Blitz. The Nintendo 64 version of Blitz 2000 is what you see on the GX TV. This is the PlayStation version of Blitz and Blitz 2000. And here is the N64 version of Blitz right here. This right here, although it's not the same copy, unfortunately, is... oh, not that one. Let's try that again. There it is. This isn't the same copy that I bought from Funcoland in 1998, but this game was one of the first purchases that I made as an employee back then. I bought this and Mortal Kombat 4, and needless to say, I had hours and hours of entertainment. NFL Blitz and Blitz 2000 are arcade football greatness at its best. From Tim Kitzrow's over-the-top commentary to late hits after the whistle, to huge 40 and 50-yard plays, to back and forth in the fourth quarter where you really don't know who's going to win because of Midway's rubber band AI. Graphically, it looks great, especially a little bit more so on the Nintendo 64, as you can see a bit more color, and the players animate a bit more smoothly, but still the PlayStation version has full motion video snippets that the 64 version doesn't have, and the sound is a bit crisper. You can't go wrong with either. And if you like arcade games at all, one of these somewhere should be in your library for either your PlayStation or your N64. The good news is that these games aren't very expensive either. As most sports games go, you're not going to be paying anywhere near what you're paying for Tecmo Super Bowl. So grab one of these for the football season and break some rules. That's what I recommend. Especially if your fantasy team's in the dumper. It'll make you feel a lot better. So that's a look at some arcade-style football games, some of my favorites that I have in my library. I thought about dragging out some other ones, talking about some Madden, some NFL Game Day, even some Jimmy Johnson VR football, but I decided not to do that for this video. Maybe I'll save that for next year. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free in the comments to talk to me about your favorite arcade-style football games. Is Blitz your favorite, or perhaps there's another one out there? Maybe Tecmo Super Bowl is your number one. Love to hear about your arcade football stories, and you can even tell me about your favorite football games if you want. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and until the next video next week, take care, my friends, and enjoy the season.